Welcome to Headline Wednesday from Dispatch U.S. Military History Magazine, developed by trackpads.com. Each week, we take one pivotal moment from United States military history and follow it from the first warning signs to the final outcome. Today, we go to Panama City and the Canal Zone in the closing years of the Cold War for the story of Operation Just Cause. A longer version of this feature, with fact sheets and photos, is available in the print edition, on LinkedIn, or by email. Just after midnight on a humid December night in 1989, the sky over Panama City filled with the deep thrum of American transport aircraft. Inside dim cargo bays, paratroopers stood shoulder to shoulder with rucksacks, rifles, and harnesses, waiting for the green light that would send them into enemy airspace. They had rehearsed the jump for weeks, but training could not fully match the sight below, a capital city on edge, lit by streetlights, burning flares, and tracer fire reaching up toward the aircraft.
Beneath them lay the hard points of Manuel Noriega's regime, the headquarters of the Panamanian Defense Forces, critical barracks and airfields, road junctions, and the approaches to the Canal Zone, where American families slept in guarded housing areas. On the ground, special operations teams were already moving through the darkness, raiding command posts, seizing radio and television stations, and trying to isolate Noriega's inner circle before loyal units could rally or scatter. The opening volleys flashed against concrete walls and corrugated roofs as aircraft rolled into their runs. When the green lights blinked on, paratroopers stepped into the warm night one after another. Canopies snapped open above the city's glow, and soldiers landed hard near airfields, roads, buildings, and parked vehicles. In the confusion of darkness, engine noise, and sporadic fire, they formed ad hoc groups and moved toward rally points. Their mission was simple to state and difficult to carry out: seize key ground fast enough that the regime could not respond in an organized way. Within minutes, airfield perimeters, towers, barracks, and road junctions were under assault. The timing mattered because the opening strike was designed to overwhelm decision-making itself. If enough pressure landed at once, no single Panamanian commander would have a clear view of the whole fight, and no loyal unit would know whether it was reinforcing a strong government or clinging to a structure already coming apart. To understand why American paratroopers were dropping into an urban capital, you have to look at the map and the calendar. Panama sits on the narrow isthmus linking North and South America, and for most of the 20th century, the Panama Canal was one of the central arteries of global trade and United States naval power. American bases, headquarters, and family housing lined both ends of that canal. Manuel Noriega ruled the country around them as an intelligence-trained strongman whose regime mixed military control, political repression, and deep involvement in the drug trade. Throughout the 1980s, tension between the United States and Noriega grew steadily. Elections were manipulated and then overturned when opposition candidates appeared to win. Protesters were beaten in the streets, opposition figures were intimidated or exiled, and fear spread beyond political circles. At the same time, Noriega's name appeared in drug trafficking investigations, and federal indictments in the United States transformed a once useful intelligence contact into a public example of a dictator who seemed to believe he could defy Washington with impunity. For Americans living and serving along the canal, the tension was not abstract. Harassment by Panamanian forces became more frequent and threatening. Checkpoints turned routine movement into confrontation. By late 1989, Noriega's regime had declared a state of war with the United States, and incidents involving American service members, including one deadly clash in Panama City, pushed the situation close to open hostility. The issue was no longer only one man's corruption. It was also about the strange geography of the Canal Zone itself, where American military installations, Panamanian sovereignty, international commerce, and local neighborhoods existed in close contact every day. A confrontation there could never remain purely diplomatic or purely military for long, because soldiers, civilians, bases, roads, and the canal all occupied the same narrow strip of ground. It involved the safety of American citizens, the security of the canal, treaty credibility, and the signal the United States would send as the Cold War era drew to a close.
Operation Just Cause did not appear out of nowhere. For years, Noriega had occupied an awkward place in American policy, part intelligence contact, part regional power broker, and part problem waiting to erupt. He had risen through the Panamanian Defense Forces, building power through internal security and control of information. His services were useful to American agencies during the Cold War, but his grip on Panama rested on uniformed loyalty, political intimidation, and force. Every crisis in Panama rippled through American headquarters on both sides of the canal because Noriega could not be treated as just another neighboring ruler.
As his methods grew more open and violent, the idea of nudging him toward a quiet exit faded. Elections were bent, opposition leaders were attacked, and staged rallies reinforced the message that he intended to stay. Inside the Pentagon and United States Southern Command, planners developed options ranging from pressure and shows of force to full removal of the regime. Maps were marked with barracks, airfields, headquarters, road networks, and communication sites. Each target also represented risk because any operation would unfold near American families, crowded neighborhoods, and a strategic waterway. By 1989, the available options had narrowed. The Panamanian Defense Forces were not large by global standards, but they were embedded across the country in barracks, checkpoints, intelligence offices, and familiar routines. Any move against Noriega had to neutralize those forces quickly enough to protect American families, secure the canal, and prevent a drawn-out urban war. The plan combined airborne assaults, special operations raids, Marine and Army ground thrusts, and psychological pressure into a tightly timed sequence meant to break the regime's command and control during the first hours.
When the first blows landed, they came almost simultaneously across a small country. In Panama City, Special Operations Forces struck the Comandancia, Noriega's main military headquarters, and other command posts. Explosions and small arms fire lit the night as strong points were hit, road intersections seized, and loyal units tried to understand where the main threat was coming from. Some defenders fought hard, others withdrew, and some melted into the streets. The aim was not to grind forward block by block, but to break the spine of the regime in one violent rush. That required more than courage. It required a tight sequencing of airborne drops, raids, ground movements, and information operations, so that each success made the next one easier. A seized airfield brought in more troops. A captured radio site reduced the regime's voice. A blocked road limited reinforcement. The pieces were meant to reinforce one another faster than Noriega's loyalists could react.
At key airfields, paratroopers and rangers dropped or landed under fire to seize runways, hangars, towers, and nearby barracks. By controlling those fields, American commanders could bring in additional troops and equipment, turn Panama's own infrastructure into a bridge for follow-on forces, and close potential escape routes for senior regime figures. Firefights flared around fences and buildings as defenders tried to hold familiar ground, but rehearsed assault teams, heavy fire support, and armored vehicles flown in on transports tipped the balance.
Beyond the capital, Marine and Army columns surged from canal zone bases towards ports, bridges, radio facilities, and interior objectives. Roads once used for routine movement now carried combat vehicles. Checkpoints that had been sources of harassment suddenly faced organized, heavily armed convoys. Some positions surrendered quickly. Others were overrun in sharp engagements that combined armored firepower and infantry clearing. Every seized intersection tightened the net around Noriega's supporters and made it harder for them to reconnect into a coherent defense.
Inside Panama City, the human cost was clear. Civilians sheltered as gunfire echoed through apartment blocks and along avenues.
American commanders had designed the plan around speed and precision to limit damage, but heavy weapons in dense urban terrain always carried risk. Fire and smoke marked more than one contact point. By compressing the most intense combat into the opening hours, the operation avoided the long siege that could have followed a slower approach, but the city still paid a price.
By daylight, the pattern was visible. Shattered strong points marked where Panamanian forces had tried to stand. American vehicles sat at key nodes controlling movement. Loyalist resistance remained, but it no longer formed a shield around the regime. Most importantly, Noriega's whereabouts were becoming uncertain. Officers who had taken cues from him struggled to reach anyone who could tell them what to do. Soldiers who once projected authority at checkpoints now saw unfamiliar uniforms at intersections they had controlled. Power in Panama was changing in real time. What turned the campaign was the combination of speed, surprise, and a carefully mapped target set. American forces struck command posts, airfields, barracks, and communications nodes almost at once, forcing the Panamanian defense forces to fight for local survival instead of building a coordinated counterattack. Air control and precision firepower reinforced that shock. Any attempt to mass Loyalist forces risked being spotted and broken apart, so defenders tended to fight in small pockets rather than as a national force.
Special operations pressure made that isolation worse. Teams hit intelligence centers, radio sites, and possible safe houses where Noriega's inner circle might regroup. Every lost node reduced the regime's ability to understand the battle or send orders. Noriega's own actions deepened the collapse. His regime had relied heavily on fear, personal loyalty, and the impression that he always knew more than his opponents. When the crisis came, that image needed a public display of control to survive. Instead, the center of the regime seemed to disappear from view. Noriega's own actions deepened the collapse. Instead of appearing publicly and rallying his forces, he vanished into a sequence of safe locations and eventually sought refuge at the Papal Nunciature, the Vatican's diplomatic mission in Panama. To followers told that he was unshakable, his disappearance undercut the remaining sense of momentum.
American psychological operations added to that effect. Loudspeakers, broadcasts, and visible control of key sites reinforced the impression that the outcome had already been decided. Local resistance could still be deadly, but it lacked a larger plan. Isolated fighters might hold a building or road for a time, yet they did so without confidence that anyone higher up could reverse the situation. The decisive feature was not firepower alone, but the ability to compress planning, assault, and psychological shock into a short window the regime could not survive as a functioning government. The campaign also showed how quickly tactical events could become political signals. A barracks taken, a broadcast interrupted, or a convoy moving freely through a former stronghold told Panamanians and outsiders that the old balance of fear had shifted. That perception mattered almost as much as the physical control of ground.
In the days after the main fighting, Panama looked very different. American units controlled the canal, airfields, and government centers, while a new Panamanian leadership entered office under foreign protection. Noriega, removed from sanctuary after pressure and negotiation, was taken into American custody and headed to a courtroom rather than a palace. For American families in the Canal Zone, the constant harassment faded quickly as checkpoints changed hands. Yet the cost of the operation remained visible in lives lost, neighborhoods damaged, and civilians who had endured firefights near their homes. Combat in an urban capital rarely confines itself to military maps. Families hid in rooms while gunfire passed outside, and the destruction around some strongpoints became part of Panamanian memory, even after the political headlines moved on.
The debate did not end with Noriega's capture. Supporters saw a swift campaign that protected American citizens, secured the canal, and removed a violent dictator. Critics argued over sovereignty, proportionality, civilian harm, and the long shadow of American influence in Latin America. Those arguments continued in living rooms, congressional hearings, and international forums. Operation Just Cause became both a military case study and a political controversy.
For military professionals, the campaign offers a compact example of modern intervention: joint forces, special operations raids, airborne assaults into urban areas, psychological pressure, and a clear political goal of regime change. It foreshadowed later campaigns in which American planners try to remove hostile regimes quickly through choreographed blows from air, land, and sea. It also showed the limits of that approach. Toppling a regime is not the same as rebuilding institutions, securing public trust, or settling the political questions that follow. The operation, therefore, became useful not only for studying how to strike, but also for asking what political responsibilities follow once the shooting stops and a new government has to stand up under outside protection.
Today, the canal and the former base areas carry the memory of that December night when geography, power, and decision converged on a narrow isthmus. Operation Just Cause remains a regular stop in discussions of force, legitimacy, speed, and responsibility. It shows how quickly a tense coexistence can become a combat operation once decisions harden into orders. It also reminds us that every paratrooper stepping into the warm darkness, every convoy moving out from the canal zone, and every special operations team entering the city carried not only a tactical mission, but a piece of a larger argument about what American power could and should do. Headline Wednesday is developed by trackpads.com as part of Dispatch, U.S. Military History Magazine.